Why doesn't Kenpachi's Bankai have a name in the Thousand Year Blood War arc? It's true, of every single Bankai revealed in the series, only two don't have a name. Kenpachi Zaraki's, which was just revealed in the most recent anime episode, and Ginjo Kugo's, whose Bankai isn't so much a real Bankai as it is a facsimile of Bankai stolen from Ichigo's overall ability set. More on that in the video linked somewhere above if you're interested. But of every character who wields a legitimate Bankai, born of a legitimate Zanpakuto, at first, Kenpachi's doesn't appear to have a name. And as we know from Ichibei Hyosabe, power resides in the name. So if Kenpachi doesn't call out a Bankai name when he releases it, is he really accessing all of that transformation's power? The fact is, we know it doesn't necessarily work like that. As long as a Zanpakuto has a name, it can still access said power, as we've seen many times when Bankai wielders release their Shikai without calling a name. But does Kenpachi's Bankai even have a name in the first place, and if not, why not? What does that mean for the character, and how does it tie back into Nozarashi's connection to both Yachiru and to Unohana? And finally, going back to that earlier point I just made, if Kenpachi had said the name of his Bankai, if he had known it, if it even has a name at all, maybe Yachiru wouldn't have had to have tried to release more power. Maybe his body wouldn't have broken. Or maybe if he had accessed his full power at the start, his body would have shattered immediately. Now, I'm currently hard at work on the review for episode 44. It is a long one, as you might expect, but I wanted to dive into this quick discussion in the meantime. Actually, there's a few videos that I want to make from this episode. Whether I'm able to get to them all or not is another question. Anyway, let's dive in. Why doesn't Kenpachi's Bankai have a name? Before we get started, one of the best ways to support the channel is over on Patreon, the link to which you can find in the description down below. Support over there is an enormous help. It makes all the difference in the world, and I want to say a massive shout out to everyone who has recently joined. Your support is so greatly appreciated, but of course, everyone's support, no matter how you're choosing to support me and the channel, well, it really does mean absolutely everything, so thank you all so very much. Firstly then, what exactly is Kenpachi's Bankai, and could the Bankai itself play a role in why it doesn't appear to have a name? Kenpachi's Bankai is quite unique, in that it changes his overall physical nature, if that makes sense. Like Ichigo's and even Yamamoto's Bankai before it, this one is smaller in scope, but it condenses that force into raw power output, to an astronomical degree. And yet it goes further than that still. Right down to his baseline character traits, Kenpachi becomes almost unrecognizable. His Bankai transforms the captain into a ferocious, demonic berserker, fueled by seemingly nothing more than animal instinct. All of Kenpachi's love and lust for battle and carnage elevated to the surface. His skin turns a dark blood red, and horns protrude from his forehead, completing his Oni demon appearance. Perhaps most interestingly of all, and most germane to this video, is the fact that his Shikai Nozarashi is suddenly broken in two. Kenpachi now wields half a sword essentially, the once ornate cap of his Shikai, now little more than a jagged wound of an edge. And I wonder what would happen if Kenpachi went straight to using Bankai from his base Zanpakuto, as we know is possible. Is the shattered sword an actual aspect of the Bankai design? Would his regular Zanpakuto therefore also be snapped in two as well? Or maybe, and perhaps most likely, his sword would automatically just become the broken Shikai blade, regardless of whether or not he was in Shikai at the time of activation. Anyway, in this state, Kenpachi reverts to an animal-like warrior who does seem to fight purely based on instinct. He doesn't seem to be capable of speech anymore, instead he simply roars and screams wildly. His new beast-like instincts enable him to sense that Gerard is about to come back to life before it actually happens. But even then, he can seemingly only scream in an effort to convey that to the other captains. His eyes are totally blank as well. Whatever is left of Kenpachi Zaraki that exists inside this form, it is hard to say for sure. Despite this, Kenpachi clearly still retains some sense of himself, as he doesn't simply attack everything around him. He only goes for Gerard, and once Gerard is seemingly killed, he doesn't start attacking the other captains, though Byakuya still wisely exercises caution. Before we continue, another excellent way to support the channel is by hitting subscribe. It really does make an enormous difference on our journey to 300,000 subs, and it's a great way to help support the channel and help support Bleach content like this, so please consider doing so today if you haven't done already. So there's the pretty sizable issue that Kenpachi seemingly can't even speak in this form, meaning he's unlikely to be calling out his Bankai's name in the traditional sense once transformed if it does have one. And sure, we've seen a mute character calling out the name of their Zanpakuto in Ataurindo, but this does feel totally different. Kenpachi barely seems to have control over himself, let alone that kind of intricate display. But again, just because he can't speak doesn't mean his Bankai doesn't have a name. There's also the manner in which the Bankai is revealed to take into account. This is the only example I can think of in the entire series where a character actively learns and acquires Bankai right then and there on the spot, in the middle of a fight. Prior to that moment, Kenpachi, it didn't even seem like Bankai was really on his radar, and why would it have been? He learned Shikai like a day ago. Obviously, Kenpachi learning Bankai is slightly different from most other characters, as he's technically done all the hard work already. He's materialized his Zanpakuto spirit long ago and built up a very strong relationship with it as a result. So Yachiru being capable of simply handing him the power of Bankai, that was always fine with me. That made total sense. And that's what happens. Kenpachi is totally overwhelmed by Gerard and left with no options. So Yachiru appears to him in what seems to be Kenpachi's inner world in the anime, which takes the form of the forest clearing where the two of them met so many years ago. And actually, that also might play a role in why this Bankai has no name, but more on that in a moment. Taking Kenpachi by the hand, Yachiru tells him that if he used her properly, then there's no one he can't cut, and she proceeds to bestow him with the power of Bankai. Interestingly, in the anime, when Yachiru says Bankai, we also hear a second voice laid over the top. It sounds like Unohana's, but it's probably meant to be Nozarashi herself, though I imagine the two are, again, perhaps closer linked than we might suspect. And this takes us nicely to the most important aspect of this Bankai, and the likely reason why it doesn't have a name. Thematically, it makes sense for Kenpachi's Bankai to be unnamed, much in the same way that it used to make sense for Kenpachi's Zanpakuto in general to be unnamed. For Kenpachi himself doesn't have a name, he's never had one. Kenpachi Zaraki isn't a real name, but one he gave himself. Well, I guess that's technically a real name, right? And in that sense, he has a surprising connection to Yuhabak, who also didn't have a birth name, shall we say, and gave himself one. A name which, in the eyes of Ichibei, is meaningless and therefore powerless. But here, Kenpachi, it's just the title of the strongest, while Zaraki is the Rukongai district that he hails from. This is really why, narratively, Kenpachi's Zanpakuto never had a name. Kenpachi himself never had one, and that was a pain that only he knew, a pain that he carried with him. While everyone else enjoyed a name to be called by, he never did, and therefore that extended to his Zanpakuto. And the irony there, of course, as well, was that Kenpachi was essentially refusing to listen to his Zanpakuto, even as it screamed at him to be heard. So in that sense, Kenpachi was inflicting that same pain that he felt on someone else. But as that someone else was his Zanpakuto, he was inflicting it upon himself. So in simpler terms, Kenpachi's Zanpakuto used to exist as a reflection of his own pain at not having a name. But in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, that all changed. Upon killing Unohana and unlocking his true power, Kenpachi was suddenly capable of hearing his Zanpakuto for the first time. Now, it's never really explained why this is. Why he can suddenly hear his Zanpakuto after so long. Is it simply because, after going through Unohana's training, after being taken to the brink of death and brought back that many times, is it because he now has the power to use his Zanpakuto to potentially its fullest capability? Why that would necessarily change Kenpachi's own attitude towards his Zanpakuto, I'm not sure. It's almost like this part of the story is saying Kenpachi used to be able to hear its voice back when he was a child, but then lost that ability once he subconsciously locked down his power. Now, this actually feels like a potentially likely scenario, in my opinion, as it's not like Kenpachi even tries to reach out to his Zanpakuto in the wake of killing Unohana. It just suddenly starts talking to him, as though a lid has been lifted, and he realizes that he can hear something. Whereas he does actively try to reach out to his blade after his battle with Ichigo and receives no response. Now, of course, it's totally possible that Kubo has changed his mind regarding Kenpachi's story, regarding Kenpachi's Zanpakuto over the years. But if we take these two scenes side by side, like I said, in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, it's as though a lid has suddenly been lifted, whereas in the Soul Society arc, despite Kenpachi trying, despite his sword screaming at him from the other side, there is something blocking the two of them from actually being able to make contact. So the logical conclusion is that Kenpachi completing this training, reacquiring his latent true power, is what has lifted that lid. Speaking of which, as Unohana dies, she notes that Kenpachi has a partner who has awakened alongside him, in her words, so could it be that Nozarashi needed Kenpachi's own true power to unlock first? I guess that again would make sense, but unless it's been retconned, as I said a minute ago, we know that Kenpachi's blade was screaming at him to be heard way back in the Soul Society arc. Anyway, despite Kenpachi's Zanpakuto embodying the pain of being nameless, it does indeed have a name after all, Nozarashi. And yet, Kenpachi's Bankai seemingly doesn't. And again, this is where it all comes back to one person in particular, Yachiru. No, not Yachiru Unohana. If anything, she is probably closely connected to Nozarashi, the Shikai itself, as heard in the anime when the two voices overlapped. And that's probably a reflection of the fact that Unohana was the only person Kenpachi ever admired. But Yachiru, well, that's where things get interesting. Kubo revealed, years after the end of the manga, that Yachiru wasn't just the spirit of Nozarashi as we all kind of assumed, but in fact she is specifically the spirit of Kenpachi's Bankai. Yachiru is the one who gave Kenpachi the power of Bankai, she's the one who was controlling the power output of the Bankai, and it's possible the Bankai even exhibits some of her traits, uncontrolled and unrefined instinct. But, and this is where the inner world comes back into the equation, what really counts is Kenpachi's first meeting with Yachiru all those years ago. Back then, he of course had no way of knowing, he'd just met his Bankai materialized, and I think it's very likely that even Yachiru herself didn't know. In fact, I can't help but think the truth only returned to Yachiru once Kenpachi unlocked his true power, and he discovered Nozarashi's name. But anyway, in chapter 114, in the aftermath of his battle against Ichigo, Kenpachi remembers his first meeting with Yachiru. Despite Kenpachi having just butchered a number of people in a very graphic way, Yachiru approached him and placed her bare hand upon his bloodied sword. Although he didn't know where she'd come from, Kenpachi was fascinated by the fact that she didn't seem to be afraid, and he asked Yachiru her name. When Yachiru didn't respond, Kenpachi took that to mean the child didn't have a name, just as he didn't either. And so Kenpachi later bestows her with the name Yachiru after Unohana, and so she, like Kenpachi, never technically had a true birth name. Considering she would later turn out to be the spirit of his Bankai, it makes sense that now, in the present, his Bankai doesn't have a name either. That being said, it wouldn't surprise me if his Bankai took on the name Yachiru in some form, since Kenpachi, well, effectively named his own Bankai all those years ago. As Yachiru herself notes in that same chapter, she had neither name nor parents, and only knew the colour of blood. The people around her were more beast than human until Kenpachi arrived and cut apart her blood-soaked world. That's also very interesting to consider. We're getting into truly speculative territory right now, but the idea that the world Yachiru saw was somehow imprinted upon her is fascinating and is then reflected in the Bankai. She notes the people around her were more beast than human, and I can't help but feel like that experience has found its way into Kenpachi's Bankai. And the same is true of the fact that the only colour Yachiru knew was that of blood, now the same colour as Bankai Kenpachi's skin. And this translates to the inner world as well, as depicted in the anime, if that's what it is. It proves that the experience had a formative effect on both Kenpachi and Yachiru in the development of their souls, so formative that it seeped into the very makeup of his Zanpakuto. Ultimately then, why doesn't Kenpachi's Bankai have a name? Well, we've established a few possibilities. The first is that it does have a name, but Kenpachi is unable to speak it after releasing his Bankai. Plus, Kenpachi would likely need to be told the name by Nozarashi or Yachiru, as we know Renji was told the false name Hihiyo Zabimaru by his Zanpakuto. And as far as we can see for Kenpachi, that doesn't happen. There's no time. After all, this is the most unusual Bankai acquisition we've ever seen. The second is that Kenpachi's Bankai doesn't have a name because it's continuing the narrative through line that this character will always experience the pain of not knowing his name in some form or another. Even if Kenpachi's character journey takes him to a place where he can learn the name of his Shikai, one name or another will simply continue to elude him, as is his fate. But the final and most likely answer is that Yachiru, as the physical manifestation of Kenpachi's Bankai, also doesn't have a name. She didn't have one when she first met Kenpachi, and it's likely her experience as Yachiru Kusajishi, the child who would become the 11th Division's vice captain, has proven, like I said, completely formative. Maybe the Bankai had a name at some point, but upon being materialized in the spirit world, perhaps she's all but forgotten it, and so has taken on the name bestowed upon her by Kenpachi instead. And then that, along with the forest clearing, the colour of blood, the humans who were more beast than man, they have all coalesced to become a part of her, and therefore a part of Kenpachi's Bankai all these years later. I actually really do quite like that idea that all of these things Yachiru describes from chapter 114 about her first meeting with Kenpachi and what life was like prior to that, that has all become Kenpachi's Bankai. It's totally possible then that even if Kenpachi's Bankai didn't have a name, or did forget its original name, that it has now adopted the name Yachiru as well, and we might learn that in the future. Alright everyone, that's it for today's video, a slightly shorter one this time. I just wanted to get this one out while in the midst of working on my review of episode 44, but I hope you enjoyed it all the same. Why do you think Kenpachi's Bankai doesn't have a name? Is it a simple case of it does have a name and we haven't learned it yet? But it is very unusual. This is the only Bankai outside of Ginjo's that a name is never attributed to, so I'd love to get your thoughts down in the comments below. How do you feel about this? Does it just link back to the theme of not having a name that is so central to Kenpachi's character? Is it directly related to Yachiru as his Bankai spirit? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Again, I'd love to read them. Alright everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. Hit subscribe down below if you haven't done already to help support the channel and support weekly Bleach content like this. It goes a very, very long way. And of course, check out the Patreon as well at the link in my description down below, where you can take that support another step further. It's one of the best ways to help support the channel and ensure its longevity. And again, a huge thank you goes out to all the new patrons over there, but also everyone over there supporting the channel. It really does make a massive difference and it's greatly appreciated. Alright everyone, but until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.